Midnight, welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Wheeling, West Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. 021, on a January morning of bitter cold in 1912, officers of the Wheeling Police were called to the Randall estate on National Road. What began as a routine welfare check, prompted by the family's unusual absence from Sunday services at St. Joseph's Cathedral, would evolve into one of the most perplexing cases in Ohio County's history. The official report of the officer described the mansion as undisturbed yet unnaturally silent, with breakfast laid out on the dining table, seemingly abandoned mid-meal. 054, the Randall family, Father Edward, Mother Gertrude, and their 3 children had seemingly vanished. Only one person remained on the property. Abigail Hollister, the family cook, was found sitting motionless in the kitchen pantry, clutching a silver serving spoon and refusing to speak. What authorities initially classified as a straightforward case of family abandonment would, over the following decades, reveal itself to be something far more sinister. 122, a case that would be methodically erased from public record by 1947. The Randall estate stood as one of Wheeling's architectural treasures, a Victorian mansion built during the city's industrial boom. The 3-story structure, with its distinctive mansard roof and wraparound porch, had been commissioned by Edward Randall's father, a successful glass manufacturer who had profited substantially from Wheeling's position along the National Road. 152, by 1912, Edward had inherited both the family business and the imposing residence located just east of Wheeling Creek. According to property records filed with the Ohio County Courthouse, the estate encompassed 4 acres of manicured grounds, which included a small orchard, a carriage house, and servants' quarters. 213, the Randalls were known in Wheeling society circles as private but generous patrons of the arts and regular attendees at St. Joseph's Cathedral. Edward served on the board of Citizens National Bank, while Gertrude organized charity functions for Wheeling Hospital. Their children Elizabeth, 14, Thomas, 10, and Margaret, 7, attended the exclusive Lindsley Institute, by all accounts preserved in the Wheeling Intelligence's society pages. 241, the Randalls represented the ideal of upper-class propriety in the early 20th century. Yet, neighbors interviewed in the weeks following their disappearance described subtle tensions. Mrs. Harriet Caldwell, who lived on the adjacent property, told investigators, they maintained appearances impeccably, but the house had grown quieter over the past year. 305, the children no longer played in the yard. Mr. Randall's voice could sometimes be heard after dark, though I could never make out what was being said. Another neighbor, the retired physician Dr. William Preston, noted that Edward Randall had developed a peculiar habit of inspecting the property boundaries each evening before sunset. 327, these observations, documented in police interviews but omitted from official reports, suggested fractures beneath the family's composed exterior. Abigail Hollister had entered the Randalls' employ in March 1911, following the abrupt departure of their previous cook. According to employment records maintained by the Wheeling Domestic Placement Agency, Abigail came highly recommended, having previously served in the household of Judge Morris Whitaker in Pittsburgh. 356, the agency's notes, recovered decades later during a renovation of their former offices on Market Street, described her as efficient, reserved, unmarried, aged approximately 38. What the agency failed to document, and what would only emerge through subsequent investigation, was that no record of Abigail's employment with Judge Whitaker could be verified. 418, her references, when traced by a determined insurance investigator in 1927, led to addresses that did not exist. The single photograph of Abigail, taken for her employment file, showed a plain-faced woman with severe hair pulled back tightly, her eyes focused slightly away from the camera. Employment records indicate she was given Sundays and alternate Thursday afternoons off, but according to interviews with local shopkeepers, she rarely left the Randall property. 449, Florence Miller, who operated a small grocery on Chapline Street, recalled, she would come in precisely at 2 o'clock on her Thursdays off, always purchased the same items, a small tin of hard candies, stationery, and occasionally carbolic soap. She never engaged in conversation beyond what was necessary. What is particularly noteworthy is that in the 9 months preceding the family's disappearance, Abigail had stopped taking her designated time off altogether. 521, the ledger at Miller's grocery shows no purchases under her account after April 1911. On the morning of January 14, 1912, Father Thomas Kenny noted the Randalls' absence from Mass. As their regular attendance had been unfailing for years, he mentioned his concern to Officer James Sullivan, who was directing traffic outside the cathedral. 544, Sullivan, according to his subsequent report, proceeded to the Randall estate at approximately 11:40 a.m. Upon receiving no response to his knock and observing several days' worth of newspapers on the porch, Sullivan circled the property. He reported observing smoke from the kitchen chimney, suggesting someone was present. After consulting with his supervisor via telephone from a neighbor's house, Sullivan and Officer Patrick Donovan entered the residence through an unlocked side door at approximately 12:30 p.m. 619, the officers' reports describe an eerily undisturbed home. Coats hung neatly in the foyer, a half-completed letter in what appeared to be Gertrude Randall's handwriting lay on the writing desk in the parlor, and most significantly, breakfast remained set at the dining table, 5 places, with food partially consumed on 4 plates. 642, the fifth setting, reportedly at the head of the table where Edward Randall would have sat, was undisturbed, the napkin still folded. Officer Donovan noted that the teapot on the table was still warm. The Randalls' personal items, including Gertrude's jewelry box containing several valuable pieces, Edward's wallet with $27, and the children's winter coats, remained in their proper places. 707, no signs of struggle or forced entry were observed. The officers conducted a thorough search of the house, finding nothing out of order until they reached the kitchen. There, seated on a stool in the walk-in pantry, they discovered Abigail Hollister. According to both officers' testimonies, she was unnaturally still, clutching a silver serving spoon, staring at the wall of preserved foods. 732, when addressed, she did not respond or acknowledge their presence. After several attempts to communicate with her, the officers contacted Dr. Robert Evans, who arrived at the property at 1:45 p.m. and determined that Abigail was in a state of catatonic shock. Dr. Evans's medical report, filed with the Wheeling Police Department and later transferred to the State Archives in Charleston, provides a clinical assessment of Abigail Hollister's condition upon his arrival at the Randall estate. 805, subject appears physically unharmed but mentally unresponsive, he wrote. Pupils dilated, pulse elevated at 110 beats per minute, respiration shallow. No response to verbal stimuli or minor pain stimulation. Maintains rigid posture and grip on eating utensil. No obvious signs of poison or substance influence. Dr. Evans arranged for Abigail's transport to Wheeling Hospital, where she was admitted to the psychiatric ward under his care. 836, hospital admission records indicate she remained in this non-responsive state for 7 days, taking minimal liquid nutrition but no solid food. The hospital night nurse, Edith Campbell, made an intriguing notation in her log on January 18. Patient spoke in sleep at approximately 2:15 a.m. Repeated phrase, the taste gives it away 3 times, then returned to silence. 904, when questioned about this incident, Nurse Campbell could provide no additional context, stating only that Abigail's voice had sounded clear and calm, not distressed. On January 21, Abigail emerged from her catatonic state but demonstrated what Dr. Evans described as selective mutism. She would respond to basic questions with nods or shakes of her head but refused to speak about the Randalls or the events preceding their disappearance. 933, the sole exception, documented in Dr. Evans's notes dated January 23, occurred when she was shown a photograph of the Randall family. Upon seeing the image, Abigail reportedly smiled slightly and said, "They've gone to dine elsewhere." This would be her only recorded statement about the family's disappearance. 955, the investigation into the Randalls' disappearance proceeded along 2 tracks, one official and documented in police reports, the other unofficial, pieced together only through personal correspondence and marginalia in official documents. The official investigation, led by Detective Howard Marsh, concluded by February 1912 that the Randalls had likely left voluntarily, perhaps due to undisclosed financial difficulties. 1024, this conclusion was supported by a telegram received from Chicago on January 25, purportedly from Edward Randall, stating, "Family relocated due to urgent business opportunity. Stop. All well. Stop. Will contact attorney Gardner regarding property. Stop." The telegram, sent from the Western Union office at Union Station in Chicago, was accepted as authentic despite the fact that Edward Randall's signature on the accompanying form, when compared years later with known examples, showed notable discrepancies. Attorney William Gardner, 1101, confirmed receiving a letter with instructions to maintain the property until further notice, along with bank drafts to cover expenses. The case was officially closed on February 17, 1912. The unofficial investigation took a different direction. In personal notes found among Detective Marsh's effects after his death in 1944, he expressed significant doubts about the resolution of the case. 1129, telegram convenient but unconvincing, he wrote. No luggage taken. No preparations for departure observed by any witnesses. Children's school items still in place. Family dog still in kennel. Gardner evasive about letter details. Most significantly, Marsh noted that Edward Randall's accounts at Citizens National Bank, where he served as a board member, showed no unusual activity either before or after the disappearance. 1157, the substantial family fortune remained untouched. Marsh's notes indicate he made inquiries in Chicago but could find no trace of the Randalls at hotels, real estate offices, or business registries. His final entry, dated March 30, 1912, read simply, "Case closed by order of chief. Instructed to cease all inquiries. Unusual." 1222, as weeks turned to months, the Randall estate remained unoccupied but meticulously maintained. Abigail Hollister, released from Wheeling Hospital on February 28, 1912, did not return to the property. According to city directories, she took up residence in a small apartment on 15th Street and found employment as a seamstress at Coleman's Dry Goods. 1244, neighbors and co-workers described her as quiet and solitary. Martha Jenkins, who worked alongside Abigail at Coleman's, told a Wheeling Intelligencer reporter in 1913, she never speaks of the Randalls or her time in their home. Once, when a customer mentioned the family's disappearance, Abigail's hands began to shake so violently she pricked her finger badly with her needle. 1313, she left work early that day and didn't return for a week. The Randall mansion itself developed a reputation among local residents. Though the grounds were maintained by a gardener who came twice monthly and a cleaning service that arrived on the first Monday of each month, neighbors reported unusual observations. Harriet Caldwell, whose property adjoined the Randall estate, kept a personal journal in which she documented strange occurrences. 1338, an entry from June 1912 reads, "Light observed in upper window of Randall House at approximately 11:30 p.m. notified police, who found nothing disturbed upon inspection." Another entry from September notes, "Cooking smells emanating from Randall kitchen chimney this morning, though no one has entered property. 2 p.m., scent of roasting meat most distinct." By 1913, local children had begun to avoid the property, claiming the house watched them as they passed. These accounts, dismissed as superstition by authorities, nonetheless contributed to a growing unease surrounding the vacant mansion. In October 1913, a small notice appeared in the legal section of the Wheeling Register, property at 1623, National Road to be maintained in trust for a period not to exceed 10 years per instructions of owner E. 1435, Randall, after which time disposition to be determined by trustee William Gardner. No further communication from the Randall family was ever publicly acknowledged. The first significant development in the dormant case came in 1921, when structural problems in the Randall mansion necessitated extensive repairs. William Gardner, still serving as trustee for the property, authorized a local construction company to address issues with the roof and foundation. 1504, during these renovations, a worker made a disturbing discovery. According to a private letter from Gardner to Chief of Police Thomas Reynolds, dated July 14, 1921, a sealed compartment was found in the cellar wall behind the coal bin. The space, approximately 3 feet x 4 feet and lined with tin, contained preserved food items, specifically, 5 sealed mason jars of what appeared to be stewed meat. 1531, Gardner's letter, marked confidential and never entered into official police records, requested a discreet examination of these items. Chief Reynolds assigned Detective Martin Whelan to investigate, but no official report was filed. What happened to the mason jars remains unclear. The construction company's records indicate the worker who made the discovery, Joseph Kowalski, left their employ the following week and relocated to Cleveland. 1602, Gardner's subsequent correspondence makes no further mention of the find. The renovations were completed by September 1921, and the house resumed its status as a maintained but unoccupied property. In a curious development, the cleaning service that had regularly maintained the interior was discontinued in October 1921. According to invoices in Gardner's files, the decision came after the cleaning staff reported persistent and unexplainable odors in the kitchen and cellar areas despite thorough cleaning efforts. On December 8, 1927, 15 years. 1640, after the Randalls' disappearance, Abigail Hollister died in her apartment on 15th Street. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, though the attending physician, Dr. Samuel Wilson, noted in his private records that her physical condition suggested long-term malnutrition despite her adequate financial means. 1703, following her death, the landlord, Thomas McCarthy, cleared out her apartment and discovered a locked metal box beneath a floorboard under her bed. According to McCarthy's statement to the Ohio County Historical Society in 1952, the box contained 3 items: a silver serving spoon engraved with the Randall family crest, a journal bound in red leather, and a set of recipes written on Randall household stationery. 1731, McCarthy, finding the items of no apparent value, turned them over to the police. Detective Sergeant Walter Griffin, who received the items, noted in his report that the journal contained only one entry, dated January 13, 1912, the day before the Randalls disappeared. The entry, reproduced in Griffin's report, read, "They don't suspect, not even a hint." 1754, the preparation takes patience, but the table will finally be turned. After all these years, justice will be served cold. The recipe collection consisted primarily of standard household dishes, though Griffin noted that several pages appeared to have been torn out. The serving spoon, when examined, showed traces of an unknown substance in its crevices. 1819, Griffin's report indicates he submitted the spoon for chemical analysis, but no results were ever officially filed. What is known, through a brief notation in Griffin's personal calendar, is that he met with William Gardner on December 15, 1927. The following day, Griffin requested reassignment to traffic duties, an unusual career move for a detective of his seniority. 1845, the items from Abigail's apartment were placed in evidence storage, where they remained until the departmental reorganization of 1948, at which point they were listed as disposed, case inactive. In 1932, 20 years after the disappearance, William Gardner died of pneumonia at age 68. His will stipulated that all client files be transferred to his junior partner, Richard Tanner. 1910, according to Tanner's subsequent affidavit, the Randall file contained an envelope marked to be opened in 1942 or upon confirmed death of all Randall family members. Tanner, respecting his predecessor's instructions, secured the envelope in the firm's safe. However, a small fire in the law offices in 1938 damaged numerous documents, including, reportedly, the sealed envelope. 1937, Tanner's statement to insurance investigators indicated that while the envelope survived, its contents were rendered largely illegible by water damage. What could be salvaged, according to Tanner, was a partial bank record showing substantial withdrawals from a previously unknown account in Edward Randall's name during December 1911, and a handwritten note that read, "Suspect Abigail has discovered. Must accelerate our departure. 2007, children unaware. Arrangements with G for final." The remainder was reportedly indecipherable. Tanner, fulfilling his fiduciary responsibilities, attempted to locate any surviving Randall family members. His inquiries with authorities in Chicago, New York, and Boston yielded no results. A notice placed in several major newspapers requesting information about the Randall family went unanswered. 2034, in 1942, as per Gardner's instructions, Tanner proceeded with the dissolution of the Randall Trust. The property on National Road was sold to the Wheeling Development Corporation, which intended to convert the mansion into apartments. During the initial assessment of the property, contractors reported significant structural issues with the kitchen and cellar areas, which showed signs of deliberate alterations not consistent with the original architectural plans. Before detailed exploration could occur, however, a fire. 2108, of unknown origin destroyed the kitchen wing in November 1942. The Development Corporation, citing financial constraints exacerbated by wartime material shortages, abandoned the renovation project. The property remained vacant, with the damaged structure deteriorating rapidly. In the spring of 1946, as part of a city initiative to address blighted properties, the remains of the Randall Mansion were demolished. 2136, during excavation of the foundation, workers uncovered a sealed brick chamber beneath what had been the kitchen floor. According to an article that briefly appeared in the Wheeling News Register on April 17, 1946, but was retracted in subsequent editions, the chamber contained household items and personal effects of an unspecified nature. 2159, city records indicate that Police Captain James Wilson took charge of the items recovered from the site. No inventory was ever filed. Captain Wilson, when questioned by a reporter from the Intelligencer, stated only that items of no evidentiary value were discovered, likely placed there for storage purposes during the original construction. 2223. What makes this statement particularly curious is that architectural plans for the Randall House, preserved in the Ohio County Historical Society archives, show no such storage chamber in the original design. Moreover, analysis of the brickwork noted in the construction company's initial report, before its omission from official records, indicated the chamber had been constructed well after the main foundation, using brick manufactured no earlier than 1910. 2254, following the demolition, the property remained vacant until 1950, when it was purchased by the city and converted into a small public park. No marker or plaque acknowledges the site's history or the house that once stood there. The most revealing developments in the Randall case emerged not through official channels, but through the diligent work of Margaret Collins, a graduate student in history at West Virginia University. 2323, in 1962, while researching her thesis on upper-class domestic life in early 20th century Wheeling, Collins discovered several documents that had been misfiled in the state archives. Among these was a sealed envelope marked Randall Investigation, Supplementary Materials, Confidential that had been placed in a box of unrelated tax records from 1915. 2345, the envelope contained 3 items: a laboratory analysis of food samples dated January of 1912, a partial transcript of an interview with an unnamed female subject, and a death certificate for Edward Randall Jr., aged 4. From 1903, a child never mentioned in any public records of the Randall family. 2400 hours 07, the laboratory analysis, conducted by Dr. Howard Phillips of Wheeling Hospital, examined samples taken from the breakfast plates found in the Randall dining room on January 14, 1912. The report states, samples from 4 plates contain traces of compound C21H2305N, consistent with alkaloid derived from Atropa belladonna, commonly known as deadly nightshade. 2400 hours 34, concentration highest in tea and porridge. Sublethal dosage on examined plates, but evidence of accumulated exposure. The interview transcript, though identifying neither the interviewer nor the subject, contains exchanges that strongly suggest the subject was Abigail Hollister. One passage reads, "Question: how long had you been administering the substance? A. Small amounts, building slowly for months. 25:00, they complained of feeling unwell in the mornings, headaches, confusion. I told them it was the damp weather. Question: and on that final morning? A. I didn't need much more. They were already weakened. Strange how they never noticed the bitter taste. Perhaps they had grown accustomed to it." The death certificate for Edward Randall Jr. 25:23 listed the cause of death as accidental poisoning, household substance, and was signed by Dr. William Preston, the same neighbor who had noted Edward Randall Sr.'s habit of inspecting his property boundaries. Collins attempted to include these findings in her thesis but was strongly discouraged by her academic advisor, who cited potential legal complications and unverifiable sources. 25:51, she omitted the material from her published work but maintained copies of the documents. In 1968, Collins contacted the Wheeling Police Department to inquire about reopening the investigation based on her findings. According to her personal correspondence, she was informed that all records related to the case had been destroyed in a basement flood in 1955 and that the statute of limitations on any potential charges had expired. 26:19, Collins died in a car accident 3 months later while traveling to meet with a journalist from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette who had expressed interest in the story. The final piece of the Randall mystery emerged in 1967, when the Wheeling Public Library received a donation of books and papers from the estate of Dr. 26:40, Robert Evans, who had treated Abigail Hollister in 1912. Among these materials was a sealed manila envelope labeled Professional Observations AH, not for publication. The envelope contained Dr. Evans's private notes on Abigail's case, including transcriptions of statements she made during what he termed twilight sedation administered during her hospitalization. 27:07, according to these notes, Abigail spoke at length when under the influence of the sedatives, though she maintained her silence when fully conscious. The fragments Dr. Evans recorded paint a disturbing picture. She speaks of the first Edward and how his death was swept away by the family. Claims the Randalls hired her in Pittsburgh under false pretenses, that she was the girl from the orphanage they didn't recognize. 27:35, repeatedly mentions a final meal and poetic justice. Most concerning are references to preserving them forever and keeping them close. Dr. Evans's notes indicate he shared his concerns with Police Chief Michael Donovan in February 1912 but was told the case was closed following receipt of the Chicago telegram. 28:00, Evans wrote, "I remain convinced that AH was involved in foul play regarding the Randall family. Her statements, while disjointed, suggest a calculated act of revenge for some past wrong involving a child, possibly her own or herself as a child. The references to preservation and keeping them close suggest the possibility that the family did not leave the property alive." 28-25, however, without evidence or cooperation from authorities, I can pursue this no further. The library archivist who discovered these papers, Elizabeth Harper, brought them to the attention of the police department. According to Ms. Harper's later statement to the Ohio County Historical Society, she was visited by 2 men who identified themselves as state officials and who confiscated the envelope, leaving no receipt or documentation of its removal. 28:54, when she inquired about the material several weeks later, she was informed that no record existed of its confiscation and that Dr. Evans's donation contained no such envelope. Ms. Harper maintained a personal journal in which she noted, "The men knew exactly what they were looking for. They asked for the Evans materials specifically and went directly to the envelope as if they knew of its existence beforehand." 29:18, when I asked how they became aware of it, they did not answer. Today, National Road Park occupies the former site of the Randall estate. The small green space, with its bench-lined walking paths and central fountain, gives no indication of the property's dark history. Official records of the Randall family's disappearance are conspicuously minimal, with most documentation having been declared lost, damaged, or destroyed over the decades. 29:48, the few researchers who have attempted to reconstruct the case have faced systematic obstacles, misfiled documents, missing records, and official disinterest. Local folklore preserves fragments of the story, though often in distorted form. Some longtime Wheeling residents still claim that on cold January mornings, the scent of cooking briefly emanates from the empty air where the Randall kitchen once stood. 30:15, what can be reasonably established is this: a wealthy family vanished without warning in 1912. Their cook, who had systematically poisoned them with belladonna for months, likely completed her revenge on that final morning. The evidence suggests the family never left Wheeling alive and that their remains may have been concealed within the property, possibly in the sealed chamber beneath the kitchen or in the preserved foods discovered during renovations. 30:42, Abigail Hollister, who took her secrets to the grave in 1927, appears to have been connected to the Randalls through some prior relationship, possibly involving the death of a child that preceded her employment in their household. The systematic suppression of information about the case points to the influence of powerful interests in Wheeling society, who perhaps preferred to believe the fiction of the family's relocation rather than confront the horrific alternative. 31:12, the telegram from Chicago, the letter to William Gardner, and the maintenance of the property were likely all elements of an elaborate deception, either orchestrated by Abigail herself or by others with motives we may never understand. As with many historical crimes, the full truth remains elusive, buried beneath layers of silence, misdirection, and the passage of time. 31:39, what is perhaps most disturbing is not what we know about the fate of the Randall family, but how effectively their story was erased, struck from the ledger of history until only fragments remain, like the bitter aftertaste of a meal long since consumed. What follows now are additional details and testimonies uncovered during the research for this narrative. 32:02, elements that provide a more complete picture of this dark chapter in Wheeling's history. Wheeling in 1912 was a city in transition. Once a critical transportation hub along the National Road and Ohio River, it had evolved into an industrial center, its skyline dominated by the smokestacks of steel mills, glass factories, and tobacco works. 32:26, the city had a distinct social hierarchy, with industrial magnates like the Randalls occupying the uppermost tier. These families lived in relative isolation from the working-class residents who populated the factory districts. According to census records, the Randall household employed 6 staff in addition to Abigail: a butler, a lady's maid, a gardener, 2 housemaids, and a chauffeur. 32:52, interviews with former household staff, conducted in 1927 as part of the insurance investigation following Abigail's death, revealed tensions within the household. Sarah Winters, who had served as lady's maid to Gertrude Randall until November 1911, described an increasingly strained atmosphere. Mrs. Randall became quite nervous in the months before I left their employ. 33:18, she complained of feeling ill each morning and of strange dreams. Mr. Randall suggested it was merely her nerves, but she insisted something was wrong with the house itself. She would inspect the children's food before allowing them to eat. James McAllister, the Randalls' chauffeur from 1909 until December 1911, noted that Edward Randall had become obsessively cautious about family outings in the months preceding the disappearance. 33:47, he would have me drive different routes each time we went into town and insisted I never discuss the family's movements with anyone, not even other staff. When I submitted my resignation to take a position with the Maxwell family, Mr. Randall seemed genuinely afraid, asking repeatedly if someone had approached me about leaving. 34:09, most tellingly, Clara Bishop, one of the housemaids, recalled finding Abigail in the Randalls' private rooms on several occasions, ostensibly dusting or delivering laundry, tasks well outside her duties as cook. When I mentioned this to Mrs. Randall, suggesting perhaps Abigail was overstepping, she dismissed my concerns. But I once found Abigail at Mr. 34:31, Randall's desk examining papers. When she saw me, she said she was looking for menu approvals. I didn't believe her. The previous cook, whose abrupt departure led to Abigail's hiring, was a woman named Eleanor Kirby. According to employment records, she had served the Randall family for 7 years before leaving in February 1911. 34:53, the official reason given for her departure was family obligations in Baltimore. But a letter discovered in the effects of Dr. William Preston in 1965 suggests a different story. The letter, written by Eleanor to Dr. Preston, states, "I write to you in strictest confidence, as the family's physician, regarding concerns that have troubled my conscience since leaving the Randall household." 35:19, in the weeks before my departure, I observed Mrs. Randall examining my spices and ingredients on multiple occasions. When questioned, she admitted she feared someone might be tampering with the family's food. She would not say who she suspected, but her manner suggested she feared her husband. More disturbing was Mr. Randall's behavior. 35:42, he began requesting I prepare separate meals for him, distinct from what the rest of the family consumed, and would watch me prepare them. The atmosphere became unbearable, with each seeming to suspect the other of some terrible design. I did not, as they believe, leave to care for family in Baltimore. I fled what I perceived to be a household on the verge of some calamity. 36:07, I have hesitated to share these concerns until now, but recent rumors of illness in the house have compelled me to speak. Dr. Preston's papers contain no record of any action taken in response to this letter, though his personal appointment book shows a meeting with Edward Randall on March 17, 1911, shortly after Abigail's employment began. 36:30, the identity and background of Abigail Hollister remain the most enigmatic elements of the case. According to records at the Pittsburgh Orphan Asylum, an Abigail Hollister was indeed a resident there from 1875 to 1886, from approximately age 4 to 15. The admission records list her parents as unknown, though a notation indicates she was left at the asylum by a woman claiming to be her aunt following the death of the child's mother. 37:00, the woman provided no further details and never returned to inquire about the girl. Asylum records describe young Abigail as unusually intelligent but reserved, showing little desire for adoption. At age 15, she was placed as a domestic servant with a family named Conrad, but no further institutional records of her exist after this placement. 37:24, a possible connection to the Randall family emerges through Pittsburgh social registers from the period 1880 to 1885, which indicate that Edward Randall's father, Henry Randall, served on the board of directors for the Pittsburgh Orphan Asylum during part of Abigail's residency there. More significantly, hospital records from St. Francis Hospital in Pittsburgh show that a woman named Catherine Conrad, wife of industrialist George Conrad, was admitted in 1888 for treatment following what was described as a household accident. The attending physician noted 38:02 that the patient had suffered severe food poisoning, source unknown. Catherine Conrad died 3 days later. A brief obituary in the Pittsburgh Post mentions that she was survived by her husband and their young son, Edward. No mention is made of domestic staff, but city directories confirmed that the Conrad household employed a young woman named Abigail during this period. 38:28, the Conrad family relocated shortly after Catherine's death, and George Conrad remarried within a year. The fate of their son Edward is not documented in Pittsburgh records after 1890. The possibility that Edward Conrad later became known as Edward Randall, perhaps adopted by Henry Randall following George Conrad's death or financial ruin, remains speculative but would explain the connection between Abigail and the Randall household that emerged in Dr. 38:58, Evans's notes. The telegram from Chicago that effectively closed the official investigation deserves particular scrutiny. Western Union records accessed by Margaret Collins in 1962 confirmed that a telegram was indeed sent from Chicago's Union Station on January 25, 1912. However, the sending form, which required identification, was signed E. 39:24, Randall in handwriting that Collins noted differs significantly from examples of Edward Randall's signature on banking documents. More tellingly, Collins discovered through Chicago hotel registries that a woman matching Abigail Hollister's description, listed as A. Hollister of Wheeling, checked into the Palmer House Hotel on January 24 and checked out on January 26, 1912. 39:50, this timeline would have allowed her to send the telegram during her stay. How Abigail might have traveled to Chicago and back without being noticed remains unclear, though a gap exists in hospital records of her care from January 22 to January 24, a period during which Dr. Evans noted she was resting comfortably and left her under the supervision of regular ward staff. 40:15, the night nurse assigned to her during this period, Mary Dolan, was dismissed from the hospital in February 1912 for irregularities in patient supervision. Whether these events are connected cannot be definitively established, but the coincidence is striking. Additionally, the letter received by William Gardner, purportedly from Edward Randall with instructions regarding the property, was never entered into official evidence. 40:42, Gardner, when questioned by Detective Marsh in March 1912, declined to produce the original, claiming it contained confidential client information beyond the scope of the investigation. The bank drafts allegedly enclosed with the letter were processed through Citizens National Bank, where Edward Randall served as a board member and where Gardner also maintained accounts. 41:07, banking regulations of the period would have allowed Gardner, as Randall's attorney, to access his clients' accounts with minimal oversight. The discovery of mason jars containing preserved meat in the sealed compartment behind the cellar wall in 1921 represents perhaps the most disturbing physical evidence in the case. 41:29. While the official disposition of these items remains undocumented, an entry in the personal diary of Officer Martin Whelan dated July 18, 1921, provides a chilling suggestion. Whelan wrote, "Gardner insists items not be logged into evidence. Chief agrees. Contents of jars disturbing, not animal meat. Dr. H. confirms worst suspicions but agrees matter best left closed." 41:57. Kowalski paid to leave town. Cannot sleep knowing what was found. The Dr. H referenced is likely Dr. Howard Phillips, who had performed the original analysis of the food samples from the breakfast table in 1912. Phillips's medical license was revoked in 1924 for morphine addiction, and he died in 1926 of an apparent overdose. 42:22. No statements from him regarding the mason jars exist in official records. Joseph Kowalski, the construction worker who discovered the sealed compartment, appears in Cleveland city directories beginning in 1922, listed as the proprietor of a moderately successful hardware store. A brief interview with Kowalski conducted by a Cleveland Plain Dealer reporter in 1947 for an article on businessmen who had relocated to Cleveland contains an odd statement. 42:54. When asked about his decision to leave Wheeling, Kowalski replied, "Some things you find are best left buried. I came to Cleveland with enough to start fresh and never look back." The reporter, focusing on Kowalski's business success, did not pursue this cryptic comment. The laboratory analysis discovered by Margaret Collins in 1962, indicating the presence of belladonna in the Randalls' breakfast, provides the clearest evidence of foul play. 43:22. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was relatively accessible in 1912. Used in various medicinal preparations and beauty treatments, its bitter taste could be masked by strong flavors, and its effects, dilation of pupils, confusion, hallucinations, and ultimately respiratory failure, might initially be mistaken for other ailments. 43:48. The report's reference to accumulated exposure suggests the family had been receiving small doses over time, consistent with Abigail's statement about building slowly for months. This chronic exposure would have produced increasingly severe symptoms while building a partial tolerance that allowed for higher doses. The Randalls reported morning illnesses, headaches, and confusion align with chronic belladonna poisoning. 44:15. The final dose, presumably administered at the breakfast table on January 14, 1912, was likely intended to be fatal. The uneaten setting at Edward's place suggests he may have been delayed in joining the family meal, perhaps even suspicious enough to avoid eating, thus escaping the immediate effects that incapacitated his wife and children. 44:37. What happened subsequently can only be conjectured, but Abigail's catatonic state suggests a violent confrontation or traumatic event. The reference in her journal to justice served cold implies premeditation and a sense of retribution for some perceived wrong. The death certificate for Edward Randall Jr., dated 1903, represents a crucial link in understanding Abigail's possible motive. 45:04. This document, found among the misfiled materials in the state archives, lists the child's age as 4 years and the cause of death as accidental poisoning, household substance. The attending physician was Dr. William Preston, the same neighbor who later noted Edward Randall Sr.'s habit of property boundary inspections. 45:26. What makes this certificate particularly significant is that no public record of a fourth Randall child exists. No birth announcement, no mention in society pages, no listing in the 1900 census. The implication is that Edward Jr.'s existence and, more importantly, his death were deliberately concealed from public knowledge. Dr. 45:50. Preston's involvement in both this concealment and his subsequent position as the Randalls' neighbor raises questions about his role in the family's affairs. The child's age and the timing would place his birth around 1899, shortly after Edward and Gertrude Randall's marriage. If Abigail Hollister had some connection to this child, perhaps as his biological mother or as someone responsible for or witness to his death, it would explain her decades-later quest for revenge. Dr. 46:24. Evans's notes reference her speaking of the first Edward and claiming to be the girl from the orphanage they didn't recognize, suggesting a complex history with the family that predated her employment as their cook. The systematic suppression of information about the case points to the influence of Wheeling's social elite and their desire to prevent scandal. 46:48, Edward Randall's position at Citizens National Bank and the family's prominence in local society would have motivated many influential figures to accept the convenient fiction of their relocation rather than confront the possibility of murder. The repeated instances of evidence being misplaced, investigations curtailed, and witnesses relocated suggest coordination beyond what Abigail could have orchestrated alone. 47:16, William Gardner's role is particularly suspect. As the Randalls' attorney and the trustee of their property, he controlled access to information and physical evidence. His insistence that the mason jars not be logged into evidence, his refusal to produce the original letter purportedly from Edward, and the convenient fire that damaged the sealed envelope in his office all suggest he may have been protecting someone, perhaps even himself. 47:46, the fact that he continued to maintain the Randall property for years at considerable expense, without any apparent communication from the family, raises questions about the source of those funds and his true instructions. A possible theory, supported by fragmentary evidence, is that Gardner facilitated the cover-up of the Randalls' deaths to protect the reputation of the family and, by extension, Wheeling's upper class. 48:12, whether he was aware of Abigail's role or believed some other explanation is unclear, but his actions consistently served to obscure rather than illuminate the truth. The fate of the Randall children represents one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Elizabeth, 14, Thomas, 10, and Margaret, 7 vanished along with their parents. 48:36, their promising futures abruptly terminated. School records from the Lindsley Institute show that all 3 were considered exceptional students. Elizabeth had recently won a prize for her essay on the modern woman's duties to society, while Thomas showed particular aptitude for mathematics and science. 48:57, Margaret, the youngest, was described by her teacher as uncommonly empathetic, always the first to comfort a distressed classmate. A class photograph from December 1911 shows all 3 children, Elizabeth tall and serious with her father's prominent brow, Thomas, slight with wire-rimmed glasses, and Margaret with a tentative smile and her mother's dark curls. 49:21, their disappearance prompted no public outcry, no desperate search efforts, merely a quiet acceptance of the fiction that they had relocated with their parents. If, as the evidence suggests, they were victims of Abigail's vengeance plot, they paid the ultimate price for their parents' secrets. The mason jars discovered in the cellar, 5 in number, corresponding to the 5 family members, hint at a fate too terrible to contemplate directly. 49:51, yet the methodical care with which the evidence was concealed suggests that even in carrying out her revenge, Abigail maintained the meticulous attention to detail that had characterized her work as the family's cook. In her twisted logic, she had indeed ensured that the Randalls would remain preserved and kept close forever. The final chapter of the Randall case closed with the death of Margaret Collins in 1968. 50:17, her research materials, according to her academic advisor, were collected by university officials and placed in storage pending review by the family. However, Collins had no immediate family, and the materials were never seen again. The Wheeling Police Department's claim that relevant records were destroyed in a basement flood in 1955 is contradicted by the department's own maintenance logs, which show no record of such a flood. 50:46, the site of the Randall estate, now National Road Park, bears no marker acknowledging its history. The few remaining physical artifacts, the silver serving spoon, the mason jars, the journal, have vanished into bureaucratic oblivion. What persists are fragments, diary entries, marginalia in official documents, oral histories passed down through generations of Wheeling residents. 51:11, these fragments, when assembled, point to a dark truth that has been systematically erased from public record. A truth about privilege, power, hidden crimes, and delayed vengeance. The Randall family vanished on a cold January morning in 1912. Victims of a carefully orchestrated plot years in the making. Their story was methodically struck from the ledger of history, preserved only in whispers and shadows. 51:41, and Abigail Hollister, the cook who served their last meal, took her secrets and her satisfaction to the grave.